Okay.
Okay, we have to say who we are.
So this is Devon Tyler,
Jim Webster.
and we are interviewing
Don Heffner.
Don Heffner for the University of Akron
That's good.
oral history class for Dr. Wilson.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we start at the very beginning?
Okay.
Where were you born? Were you born here?
I was born in Akron, Ohio. We were at Akron General Medical Center. It was People's Hospital at that time. My family has lived here for a long time. We lived right behind City Hospital. My parents lived there. They moved there in 1940, and they lived there until they went into a senior citizens apartment. So they lived there many, many years, right in central Akron. We were close to downtown, close to Akron U, and it was just, a good place to grow up.
Was your father a factory man?
No, he actually owned a grocery store. They ran a mom and pop grocery store in Goodyear Heights. He ran that for many, many years until A&P moved in next door, and pretty much ended up that business went down because of that, and he ended up hiring in at Akron U. And he worked at Akron U till his retirement. He retired when he was 70 years old from Akron U.
Okay.
Okay.
My mother actually, she worked in the grocery store there, and then she worked for another business downtown. She worked in the Scott's 5 and 10. I don't know if you know where that was at. That is where Canal Park is now. It was right there on the corner, across the street from O'Neill's, and it was a huge 5 and 10, and she worked there for many, many years after my dad had sold the store.
What was it like growing up in Akron?
Really, it was good. It was actually dirty and smelly a little bit at that time. You always, when the wind was right, you always smelled Goodyear or Firestone, depending on which way the wind was blowing. At that time, when we were younger, parents, our mom, she always hung clothing outside to dry, and you always made sure which way the wind was blowing, because it was a dirty town, but it was we always used to call it the smell of money, because it was people were working, and there was a lot of people working in the rubber industry at that time.
So you said both of your parents worked at the mom and pop store, right?
Yes.
So how did you get started at Goodyear? How did you get into the rubber industry?
When I graduated from high school, I was slated to go in the military 3 weeks after I graduated. And I was working in a little grocery store at the time, too. All through high school, I worked in a small grocery store. It's gone now. It's tore down. It's a parking deck for City Hospital now. So that's where it was located at. I told them I was going to leave. I quit. I wanted to give a few weeks of just goofing off before I went into the military. And I received a letter saying, "You're not going till October now." And I thought that was a fine idea. I'd have the whole summer just to really goof off and have some fun before going in the military. And my father was pretty much of a workaholic, and told me, if you want to live in this house, you need to go get a job for the summer. And he says, Goodyear's hiring, get yourself down there. And it was just a couple of weeks later, I was working evening shift, full time. We didn't make a lot of money. It was a higher end rate of $3.10 an hour. So in 1966, though, that was not bad money. That was more than I was making at a grocery store in high school. So that's how I ended up going into Goodyear. Then after I returned from the military, I kept my service, That was, that's federal law that they have to give you a job back, or, your job back, or a job that is compatible to what you left. So they hired me back in, and I went to work. 4 days after I left the military, I was back working at Goodyear.
So what did you do?
I was actually, when I hired into Goodyear in '66, I was curing de-icers for airplanes. The old building it's tore down now. It's right next to where the rim plant is. It was the Goodyear rim plant at the time. Now it's, I think it's Hayes Lamarance has bought that from Goodyear. But there was a building right next to our 5-story building, and we cured de-icers on the top floor. It was most of the building was a storage building. They had railroad that came in the end of the building. There was 2 tracks that came in, and they would bring tires in. They made race tire tanks. They were called puncture-proof tanks. They were rubber-lined tanks for gasoline, so when they'd have an accident on a racetrack, it wouldn't cause fires. So they made that in one part of the building, and on the top floor we cured de-icers for airplanes. The women built the de-icers, and they were just layered up plastics and electrical, so because it was heated, and it would go on the front end of an airplane wing, and that's what kept them from icing. So that's what I did before. When I came back, I worked in the industrial products division. I was what they called re-roll and repair liners. It was a liner that had to go between uncured rubber. It was a fabric, and it kept them from sticking together. And it was all for conveyor belting, hoses. We built. They made fire hoses, irrigation hose, a lot of large conveyor belts, mining for mines and things like that. They also built, in that division, they built dock bumpers. So that's what was going on in the area I was working. And that building is still standing. It's on the back side of where the technical center is at Goodyear now. There's a building in the back, a large building in the back. It's actually larger than the technical center. You can see it from the expressway, but that was in that building.
So you said after your time in the military, you went back and started working at Goodyear. Was this when you were working with a lot of the women?
No, that was when I first hired in. Right out of high school, that was all women. The other, when I came back from the military, that was the industrial products division, okay. And I was doing conveyor belting and hoses, working in that area. After 4 years there, I took the test for apprenticeship at Goodyear and was accepted in the Goodyear Apprentice School. So I spent 4 years in the Goodyear Apprentice School with on-the-job training and schooling. We went to school every week and then on the job itself. So did that for 4 years and became a journeyman pipe fitter when I finished, and started my career from that point on working in the maintenance divisions. Also worked in 1980. I went to work in the construction crew, and that was the division that worked at building the technical center. We built tire presses. We repiped and rebuilt tire presses that were brought in for that. They had tire machines that we rebuilt, and all that was for the Innovation Center, which was race tires and also experimental tires. So I didn't do any of the work there after that. Once we finished the construction, that's in 1985, I went to corporate headquarters. And from that point on, I spent my whole career at corporate headquarters. But through the apprentice school, before that, I was in every division. They put you in every division. Every 3 months, they moved you to a different division. So you had experience working in all of the Goodyear division, whether it was chemical, the industrial products, the metal products, which is the rim plant, course, through the tire division. So we worked them all. Every 3 months we changed for 2 years, or for 4 years. So
What did you do at corporate?
I was a maintenance person at corporate.
Okay.
I worked just mostly pipe fitting and repair until in the early 90s I had the opportunity to go in the air conditioning shop. So I signed to go in the air conditioning shop and then went to school for 3 years for air conditioning. So I worked in the air conditioning shop the rest of my career there. I was still a pipe fitter, and I did pipe fitting when I was called to do it, but my main job was air conditioning maintenance. So from that point until I retired, I worked in the air conditioning area. And there were very large air handlers at Goodyear. I don't know, I've been through some of the tunnels at Akron U, so I know what some of the tunnels look like there. Goodyear has the same thing. They have tunnels, they have towers with air handlers in it, roof handlers. So there was anything you could think of for different type of systems, they had it.
You had mentioned the working with the women. Throughout your career, were there a lot of women working there, and how were they received? How were the relations between the men and the women?
It seemed to be pretty good. We worked with, there was a lot of women there that were still there from World War II. And they didn't, they were good paying jobs. They didn't want to give up those jobs after World War II. They stayed. Most of the time they did things like, like building de-icers, air spring division. A lot of women worked in the air spring division. But also there was tire builders, some things like that. They did just about anything that the guys did. And they had the right to do it. They signed a job. Everything went by service. You have enough service, you sign that job, you're the first one that gets it. And it doesn't matter.
We've always heard about Goodyear and Firestone being family companies. How did that affect your life, your social life? Did you relate a lot to your coworkers?
Yeah, I still have a lot of good friends that were co-workers. We still see each other. We, have dinners together. Not all of them live here in the Akron area. After retirement, they've moved. But when they're in town, we get together for dinner or breakfast or lunch, whatever we can put together just to spend some time together. It was a family business. It was when I hired in, it was almost like if your dad or your grandfather worked there, you're going to work there. Mm-hmm. If you want a job, because it was almost like a legacy. My grandfather worked at Goodyear, and his brothers all worked at Goodyear, so that didn't really have an effect when I went there. They were already gone when I went to work there, but I had a friend in the fire department, and that was one of the guys that kind of pushed through things when I hired in. He would go to the labor, they call it the labor department, the hourly labor department, and they would, where is his paperwork? And he would kind of push it along because he knew people there. And that's how people got in back then.
Because I had heard that they had sports teams and
very much so.
Sports teams for the kids and of the workers, and they did a lot of fostered that family feeling. Did you participate in any of the sports teams or anything else?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did. I was when I was still in the apprentice school, played softball. They had softball teams. They had quite a number of softball fields. Actually, where the racetrack is at now was where the softball fields were at. They tore out all of the softball fields and built the racetrack. But there, of course, at that time, though, it was going downhill with a number of people there, so they didn't need all them. So they do still have one ball field, and that's down by corporate headquarters. There's still a ball field there. But there was probably 10 or 12 ball fields in that area, and they were full all the time with people there. They had volleyball leagues. basketball leagues. At one time, Goodyear, and I believe Firestone and the rest of them pretty much had a semi-pro basketball teams. And they would recruit guys out of college that were good basketball players to come to Goodyear. You'd work at Goodyear, but you were a basketball player. Because it was huge at that time, the sports. So there was a lot of stuff going on there. Anything you wanted to do, they have fishing clubs, they had boating clubs. Actually, if you go out on South Main Street in Portage Lakes, you'll see a sign there. It's the Goodyear Yachting and Boating Club. That's still there. I don't know if it's still affiliated with Goodyear now or not. They used to have an engineering fishing club, which was the guys that worked in the shops had the fishing club, and then they had a Goodyear, just a fishing club. They have a rifle range, pistol range, and they still have that. So all of that was available, and anything that you felt that you wanted to do, you could do it. It was there for you to do. At Christmas time, they always had stuff for the family, the kids. You had the Goodyear Gymnasium, and there would be a Santa Claus there, and they would blow up the big balloons. Goodyear built a lot of the balloons that you see in the Macy's Day Parade, and they'd have some of them partially blown up in the gymnasium, and of course the kids would come in, and we were younger. They had Goodyear Sportsman's Club would come in. They always did things like that when we were kids. You go in and see all of these things that the Goodyear Sportsman's Club was doing. So there was a lot of things to do, and there was a lot of things they just took care of because they did consider it a family. It was a family affair.
Yep. So during your time at Goodyear, working either in the apprentice school or with air conditioning, were you at all involved with the union? Or?
Yes, very much so. When you hired into Goodyear in the hourly ranks, the only way you could get in was to hire into the union. You had to be in the union. It was a union shop. So you hired in, you were in the union automatically, and you paid union dues. I was union representative in a number of places. She's probably in the shower, that's why she didn't answer that. I was union representative in a number of places. When I was in the RIM plant, I was a union representative. Supported the union because that's how you got your pay raises and your benefits and things through the union negotiating. I was part of the strike in 1976, and we were out for 144 days, and I was still in the apprentice school then when we were out of work. And at that time, all the companies were out except General, Firestone, and BF Goodrich, and Goodyear were all out at the same time. So trying to find any work at all around this area you just couldn't find it, because everybody was looking for just some work to keep money coming in, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle at that time. My second daughter was just born, and just a baby, so it was a hard time. You did what you could to get by. You of course you kind of used the system a little bit, and at that time you could get food stamps. They were allowing food stamps for strikers, so I would get food stamps to help just feed the family. I called the bank where I had a loan at for my house and negotiated some half payments for a while until we got back to work, because they knew we were going back to work, and sooner or later you're going to go back to work. So, and just negotiate stuff and do the best you can. It was a struggle, though, for that long a period of time. We went out in April and didn't go back until August. So
You had mentioned a few minutes ago about when we were talking about the extracurricular activities that at the time it was starting to go downhill. What was your first inkling that something in the industry was starting to change?
Well, it was actually right after the 76 strike. In 1978, they shut down the tire division completely, stopped building tires there at all, just shut the whole building down, and laid off a lot of people at Goodyear corporate headquarters area. In the back buildings that were there, they were doing production there. It was industrial tires, large tire. They actually had race tires at Plant 1 and experimental tires at Plant 1. That's the old corporate headquarters. We called it Plant 1 at the time because it was a production facility. And those were all in the back buildings. And those are all tore down now. Those buildings were all there were buildings all the way to River Street, all the way down to almost to Case Avenue, around where the clock tower is. There was buildings all down through there. And they were at one time packed full of people. And they tore those down in the late 70s. Just shut down, moved stuff away. Race tires was about the only thing there, and then they moved race tires when they opened up the Innovation Center and put race tires and experimental up there. There was not much left at corporate headquarters production. I think it was just some labs down there at the time where they would test rubber and test materials. And that was all that was left at corporate headquarters area. Buildings there themselves were quite old. They were built in the 20s, some before that. One of the areas where I worked at, the column posts were still made out of wood. They were wooden column posts. They were probably 12 to 14 inch square wood, but it was a 4-story building in wood, and they would have steel beams onto it, but that was still, so that tells you about how old they were. In the back buildings, when they were still there, the river ran underneath the buildings. If you know where the river is, it comes out on Case Avenue, but it feeds in right around 3rd Avenue, and you'll see it go in behind Goodyear. It goes underground. They built that underground, or they built the buildings right over top of it, the river in that area. And when they tore all those buildings down, they left the concrete floor there and just put dirt over top of it. So you think there's nothing there. There's river underneath there. So I don't know if they're ever going to uncover that or not for the projects they're doing down there now. Mm-hmm. I know they're reworking some things. I haven't been down there in a while. But at the River Street side, the river still runs underneath. Mm-hmm. So probably a lot of other things in there too. But there was all the piping and everything that fed the calendars and mills ran over the river underneath the floor, and you would have to get in a boat and go down in there to do repair work. So, and it was pretty dirty and nasty, as you can imagine.
When that plant closed in '78, what was going through your mind about your own job security at that point?
Just wondering if I was going to have a job. My brother actually worked for Firestone, and when it went downhill in the early '70s, he was out of a job, and he ended up at Cyberling Tire and Rubber for a while, and they closed it. And I'm thinking, well, this could happen to me too, because he actually ended up going to school for air conditioning himself and couldn't find any work here. There was none around. In 1980, he moved to Dallas, Texas area. And, I'm thinking, okay, maybe, this is what I'm going to end up doing too. Because I wasn't in the air conditioning field at that time yet, in the early 80s. But I was able to hang on and stay there. A lot of the friends that I went to school with, that the apprentice school and worked with, were laid off for long periods of time, 6-7 years. And of course, they found work elsewhere, and then they get called back to Goodyear. Do you want to come back or not? Some did, some didn't. So, but it was difficult times. I was very fortunate in that I never was laid off. I stayed working, but it was always in the back of your mind when they have a slowdown. Okay, is this going to end up catching me this time? Yeah, I was just very fortunate it didn't. So, but it was, well, they were difficult times. You know, you look at your spending and watch what you spend, because at that time you just don't know if it's going to be there next month. So when if you want to go buy a new car, you think about it. Okay, what's going on at work before you make that decision. So they were tough times.
And then you had participated in the '76 strike.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, there were what they were calling the triennial strikes every 3 years, from '67, '70, '73, and so on. At that point, were you just getting tired of striking? And
You don't like them because you're out of work and there's no money coming in and things like that. I just missed the 1970 strike. That was a long strike. It was a couple of months long. I came back in July, and I think they'd just gone back to work a couple of weeks when I came back from the military to go to work. So I was just missed that strike. In '73, they didn't have a strike. In '76 was a big strike. And in '79, there was no strike. And then from that point on, I think the longest strike that I recall was like 6 weeks. So it wasn't a long period of time, but it's long enough to drain bank accounts and things like that. So they were difficult. You know.
what was the social climate at work during those years? Employee relations, relations between you and management.
It always seemed to be a division between management and labor, and because management would stay in during the strike and they'd be living in there, working a lot of overtime, making a lot of money, and you're standing a picket line, and that was difficult. So especially during '76, caused a lot of animosity. So it made it difficult. You know, a lot of these, they were people too. I tried to look at them, they're just guys trying to make a living the same way I'm trying to make a living. They're just doing it on the management side. I'm doing it on the worker side. So my last 7 years inside of Goodyear, I was not working for Goodyear. I was working for an outsourced company. I retired early from Goodyear at age 55. They offered me a bonus to retire early, and I left early, and they brought in a outsourced company, and the outsourced company called me and asked me if I'd like to come back to work as their maintenance supervisor in the same area I'd been working. So it was a no-brainer. I wasn't ready to retire at 55. I was going to have to find a job, and they offered me a job in the same place that I'd known for 19 years. I've been working there 19 years. And it's, okay, I'm in, So I worked my last 7 years as management, as supervisor. So and through my time at Goodyear, I'd worked supervision on and off. So I'd worked in the offices and worked supervision. I worked in the construction crew for 2 years. I worked scheduler planning. I do estimating of jobs. I work doing that, buying materials, and getting jobs put together for the supervisor. I hand a package to the supervisor. Here's your material, here's the drawings, here's everything to do a job, and they would go out and do the job, get the job done. But I did that for almost 2 years.
So you worked in on both the labor and the management
Yeah,
side
I've
of
done
this
both.
division?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Keeping that in mind, like that perspective, how do you think that, what's your take on the debate over who was more responsible for rubber leaving? If there is,
There's always been a lot of debate on that one. Yeah, a lot of You hear a lot of things, and you don't actually know for a fact. But the '76 strike, was huge in the Akron area, and the buildings are old. They're multi-story buildings, and everything had to be trucked up and down elevators or on conveyors, and that's expensive. And the newer buildings that they built, the new tire factories, it was in one end of the building, the raw materials, and round and black and out the back. That's what they call it. And that's really the way it was. It was all one-story building, and it made for much more efficient. It let fewer people, and of course, people are money when it comes to a company. And I understand that. It's, that's why companies cut people, because that's where they can cut. It's the easiest thing to do. It's hard to cut your electrical usage. How you shut every other light out and save electric or something. People is your money. And that there was a lot of factors in that. So I don't know that we heard a lot of rumors that management had said, upper management had said that they would never ever build a tire plant in Akron because it's too hostile work. The last plant they built in Oklahoma, it was a salary plant, so there's no union in there at all. So it's just a different environment to work under. We worked piecework. When I worked production plant, a lot of it was piecework. You got paid so many cents for each piece you put out, and piecework is not easy. It's difficult work, and you have to work pretty hard at it to make your money. You can make good money if you were good at it. You made more than your piecework rate if you worked hard at it, but it was difficult work. Liners were heavy. When I re-rolled liners, they were not light. Some of the liners weighed 500 pounds. You manhandled stuff.
Wow.
You learned how. You learned how you'd stand them up on end. 500-pound liner would be on a bench, and you'd be able to stand it up. Just learning how to do it. Leverage. It's all absolutely. And but you got paid so many cents for each one that you took care of. So piecework is not easy. I don't know that they're doing a lot of piecework rates anymore. I'm not sure. Because I'm not familiar enough with that. I haven't been in a piecework environment since 1974. So
I think now it's mostly in the garment industry.
They still do piecework.
Because they can get away with it.
Yeah. I'm not sure that they do it so much. I don't think they do it. They have a quota of how many tires the tire builders need to put out in the race tire division, but it's not a piecework rate. You have to build so many tires in an 8-hour shift, and that's.
During those years when, during the decline, what did you notice around you in the Akron area? Was it affecting the area? What did you see? What did you experience here?
Well, you saw it affecting everything, really. It not only affects just people working at Goodyear, but there are many outlying businesses that relied on the rubber companies, whether it be restaurants or mold companies or machine shops that would build parts. Just many issues like that of what it would take to keep a factory running. It affected them too. And you see outlying businesses shutting down, and that was going on a lot around Goodyear and Firestone, all the rest of them. You would see all these outlying businesses, even the little restaurants across the street from the old Plant 2 tire plant. They were all long gone because they couldn't support. The guys weren't there to come out and go to the restaurant or the bar. There was a lot of bars across the street from corporate headquarters and the old Plant 2. There were bars everywhere. And they were full of guys before work, during work, and after work. It's amazing. Guys would go out and drink lunch.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time there.
I'm from Cleveland, and it's
Really,
a steel
steel.
mill. Yeah.
Public Steel was up there. It was the same thing. The bars were there. Well, if you go down Goodyear Boulevard now or Market Street, you don't see any bars there anymore. There was a lot of them. Across the street, down the street. They're all gone because they can't support. Nobody there.
I remember you saying you had lived in Goodyear Heights. When did you leave that immediate area?
Lived in Goodyear Heights from 1970 to 1977. Bought a small house up there. It was one of the Goodyear houses that was, all those were built by Goodyear. And it was built in 1918 for Goodyear employees. And lived there started having kids and needed more room. The bedrooms were very small. One bedroom was just very small. You couldn't hardly put a single bed in it.
Yep.
And I think they had probably people before may have used it for a sewing room or whatever the ladies did. But so they were older homes. And they were difficult to maintain. Windows were old, and so we moved. At that time, moved to a house in Manchester. I lived in Manchester for a number of years. Then went through a divorce, and my wife and I, we got married in 1987, and we lived in Greene for a while, and just saw way too much traffic out in the Greene area and way too much sprawl out there. She grew up in this area. She went to Garfield High School, and she lived right off of Archwood Avenue on Dietz, and that's where she grew up. So we decided we were coming back to Firestone Park.
There was a message on the machine.
Yeah, it rang while I was here. I didn't know who it was.
Okay.
Didn't hear it. I didn't pay attention to it. This is my wife, Sue. This is Jim and Devon.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Devon. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm going to travel with my 13-day-old grandson.
Hey.
That sounds like fun.
All right.
It'll be fun.
It'll be fun. Yeah, I think the last time we met, he wasn't even born yet.
Wow.
He was. So,
He's brand new.
Yeah. Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, he's a keeper. So, I got all daughters and then all grandsons after that. So we're going from there. So, I forgot where we were at now.
You're talking about living in different places before moving back here.
Yeah, we moved here 17 years ago. And we've been here for 17 years in the park, and I love this area. It's close to it was close to work. Getting to Goodyear was, less than 10 minutes away. We're just a couple of minutes from the plaza here, and the malls are close. Neighbors are good. This neighbor over here is probably the best neighbor anybody could ever have. Right next door. Yeah, he's phenomenal. He's 70 years old, and he gets out and runs and rides bikes. He does marathon biking, and he's a golf buddy, and so he's been, and he worked at General Tire for a while, then he worked at Firestone. So he's a rubber. He was mostly office work. He did sales for them. So, and you see that around, back in the day, everybody worked. There were so many people worked at Goodyear, Firestone, that all your neighbors worked at a rubber company somewhere. It seemed like it was just part of the process. When I lived in Goodyear Heights, Goodyear Heights was a tough area because it seemed like all the wind blew that direction, and it was definitely had an odor to it, and you don't smell that in Akron anymore. It's not there.
Right.
Because they just don't do that much of that type of work anymore. What little bit they do now is pretty well cleaned up when it exhausts, so you don't get that odor.
You said you hadn't been back to that area in a little while.
In what, Goodyear Heights?
Goodyear Heights.
When we moved out of there in 1978. So, and you live in Goodyear Heights, right? What street did you live on?
Morning View.
Well, I lived on Sumatra, so that's just the next street over.
Yeah.
So that's not far away. My dad's grocery store was in Goodyear Heights. It was right on the corner of Goodyear Boulevard and Honal. It's not there anymore. It's an empty parking lot now.
Yeah.
So, but it was there. That's where it was at.
They have built a school there. A new
Cyberling.
school.
Yeah, Cyberling School. My oldest daughter went to half of her year in kindergarten there before we moved to Manchester.
Down by the headquarters. They've had the new headquarters, but they've also put in I believe, a charter school or a Montessori school.
That's in the old headquarters
Yeah.
on Market Street. I understand they moved. I've been gone 4 years now. I retired 4 years ago, but I heard they've done that. I heard they've started work in Goodyear Hall, remodeling that for condos. There's going to be a number of condos, then on the first floor there's going to be businesses going in there. There's still a gym there. They're going to keep the gym. They're going to keep the theater. There's a large theater there. My understanding is they're trying to get a restaurant in where the bank used to be. That was the Goodyear Bank on the corner originally. And then it became National City, and then it was PNC, where they closed a number of years ago. But back when people were working there, that bank was very busy. And they used to have a bank window inside corporate headquarters. There was a lady that sat inside inside there. She was by herself, but there was a bank inside, and people would come cash their paychecks and things like that. And they closed that years ago and put a little machine in. So it's gone now, but there was just an ATM there when I left.
And they're building a hotel now.
The
They
hotel,
started a Hilton. I believe it's a Hilton.
yeah, it's a Hilton Garden or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
That was the parking lot I used to park in that
Okay.
parking lot. So
Okay.
I know right where that's at. The Goodyear Hall building that's a unique building. That was at one time one floor. The third floor was a dormitory for women in the 20s and 30s. There was a premium on bed space and apartments in this area. Had all the work going on. People were coming from West Virginia, Kentucky to come to work, but there was no place for them to sleep. And people would hotbed. The guys would hotbed, and that I don't know that that'd be a tough one. One guy getting out. It's like you getting out and going to work in the morning, and he's coming home and going into the same bed, and that would be a toughie.
Yeah, but the bed's always warm.
The bed's warm for you. That's why they
There you
called
go.
it hotbedding. But they had the dormitory for women on the third floor, and there was up until just maybe 10, 12 years ago, there were still bathtubs in there in the one section and shower stalls. They tore a lot of that out to build some new restrooms in that area about 10, 12 years ago. So it was all set up to be dormitory use, and that's where the classrooms were at. When I was there, apprentice classrooms were in that building on the 5th floor. A lot of office space up in there, but that's a unique building. It's built differently than you'd ever imagine. There's not a lot of steel in that building. It's all the floors are 18-inch thick clay blocks, and they're hollow. You drill down through them, you hit a hollow spot, and drill down through the second to get from floor to floor when you're running piping or electrical up through from floor to floor. So they were different. They were different. More than you can imagine. A lot of little cubby holes in the building. If you knew where to go, there was real tiny spaces. Crawl into, squeeze in, because there was stuff in there you had to work on. Yeah. So it was a unique building. Difficult to work in because of some of that stuff. The difficult working environment.
So to take a little bit of a retrospective look, looking at Akron then, looking at Akron now. What do you think are any sort of lessons or legacies or things like that that the tire industry's left behind?
I think one of the things that we saw it for a while there. They didn't, the building of tire machines. They had a building that was they called it Building 41. It was in behind. It's a grass field now. But that building was the engineering building, and they used to build their own tire machines. And they used to do prototype machines in there, where they would have the engineers would come down and design it. Then they'd have a group that built the machine. Well, this is not working quite right, so they would adjust. And then when they got it the way they wanted, then it was sent down, and then the tire builders building machine. They would build all the machines in that area, and then they would come apart in sections and ship them out to the tire plants where they had to go. But Goodyear used to build all their own machines, everything. They thought they could get it done cheaper elsewhere, so they started hiring out to different companies. And a lot of times the quality wasn't as good. And once Goodyear tore that building down, they couldn't build them there anymore, then the prices went up. So it was costing a lot of money to build tire machines. Now it seems to be Akron is research and development for both Goodyear and Firestone. I'm not real familiar with Firestone, but you look at what they built there. They just finished their innovation center. They build race tires here. They build experimental things here. Their research facilities here. And the same with Goodyear. The research facility is still here. Yeah, General's long gone. She worked in the lab at General Tire testing lamp black. She'd come home as dirty as a guy with a lamp black many, many times. It was just, you see everything now is the research division. Now, those are all high-paying jobs, but you don't have the sustaining jobs that you did with a tire builder or, a lot of the work that was done inside was not just tire building; it was sustaining the tire building. You had to mix the rubber. You had to put it on a fabric. It was you run through a calendar, and the calendar would put rubber on a fabric, and that's what would be cut to make tires. And they had beads that they had to build. That was a fabric that was wound around rubber, and that was the bead that fit around the rim. That's what sealed your air in the tire, and they built the beads there, and everything was done right there. And they had to cure the tire, and then they had to test it. They had to check it for balance. They would adjust them for balance. So there was a lot of things going on inside those buildings. And so when I went in there, they had machines in every little corner you could possibly think of. Any place they could stick a machine in, that's where you'd find a guy working in this little cubby somewhere, because we had room for him, so we put him in there. And there was just tons of people working in there. Probably 15,000 people working at Goodyear in a production type facility. And there's less than 300 there now. There was, of course, the metal products division. They built rims all the way from the bus and truck size rims upward to earth mover size rims. And those were huge. They did a lot of that. There was a chemical division. There was two different chemical divisions. One was Chemi Gum, which they made synthetic rubber. And they would use that. It was used in the tire industry, but it was also used in paints and coatings. It mixed with that type of stuff. They had a different chemical division. It was a liquid chemical division. So there was two different chemical divisions, and there's not much of that left anymore. And the Chemi Gum division was sold. That's a different company now. The rim plant was sold. That was all sold out in 85, 86, when Goldsmith came through and tried to buy into Goodyear. And it ended up, what was amazing is Goldsmith was going to come in and break up the company and sell pieces, parts off. That's where the money was at. Well, what did Goodyear do? To buy him off, they sold off all the parts of the company. Aerospace, Goodyear Aerospace was huge. Of course, back during the war, it was Goodyear Aircraft. They made airplanes there. They built Corsairs. And a lot of them were women working there. But there was, that was a huge division of Goodyear. It's not anymore. It's Meggitt, and I can't remember the other company that's out there now. But they were all bought by different companies.
Yeah.
Martin Marietta, I think, is the other division out there,
I think.
and they're moving.
I don't know if it's changed hands now, but the hangar, the blimp hangar.
Yeah.
The book stated that Lockheed
Lockheed
owned
Martin.
it.
Yeah.
They may still own it.
I think they still do. Yeah.
They're trying to decide what to do with it.
Yeah, because they bought all that and they're going to shut all that down. My neighbor across the street works at Lockheed.
Okay.
So he's going to be out of a job in August. So see, it's still going around in circles here. And his wife works for Meggitt, which is the other division that used to be Goodyear Aerospace. So that was wheel and brake division. So, all of that was all part of Goodyear. They sold it all off to pay off Goldsmith.
Yeah, ironic.
Ironic, isn't it? And we all talked about that. He said that's what he was going to do. So where's it going? So, Goodyear had a issue years ago. When they first went to radial tires, Goodyear didn't want to go to radial tires. They wanted to stay with bias ply tires, and that was the thing in the past. And they got hurt pretty bad during that period of time. They had to spend a bunch of money just to catch up to Michelin. Michelin was into radial tires really, really heavy, and of course that's everything's radial now. I don't think you can buy a bias ply tire anywhere. They're just not around because it was not as good. So, some decisions that are made are not always the best decisions. They had a division that was part of the oil industry. It was a pipeline in Alaska. They bought into that, and it was a huge amount of money. And they finally sold that off, too, a long time ago. They bought into, it was a Sumitomo Tire and Dunlop, and it was probably a huge mistake there. It was not as good a division as they thought it was going to be for them. They spent almost $1 billion on that, so it was huge money, and that cost them. But, bad decisions. A lot of it is bad decisions by management. So it works both ways. Why is things moved when they shut it down? Well, it's the same thing we talked about is you get rid of people. That's how you save money. So we've made this bad decision. We bought this, or we got into this venture and it's not working. How are we going to get out of this? We've got to get rid of some people so we can get some money. You got to have that, the cash flow to make it work. So it makes it difficult, and the guys working don't have any control over that. The guys building a tire don't have any control whatsoever.
Well, let's talk about Wheels of Fortune for a little bit. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but what's your take on it? Do you like it? Do you think it handles the
book itself? Oh yeah, it's been probably. That book came out a number of years ago, and I read it right away.
1999.
99. That's when I read it, and I haven't read it since. It sits on my coffee table. It's been on my coffee table for years, and I just thought it was a great book in the history of the tire industry in the Akron area. Goodrich was the first one here. Before any of the rest of them built a tire plant downtown. And then the rest of them started moving in, and Goodyear was 1898 when they came to Akron. So the book I thought was very good. A lot of good pictures of showing some of the things going on, and some of the old equipment and the conditions people had to work under, and you can understand why some of them at that time in the 30s formed a union, because the conditions were horrible. I don't know if it was in that book or not, but I've read some things. The guys in there working some of the chemicals and stuff, you can hardly breathe. And they would just have to go over and stick their head out a window every so often to get fresh air, because the chemicals, was not good for you. And of course, you look back now,
They're banned.
they're banned now. You can't even be around some of this stuff. Actually, when I was in the apprentice school, there was a cement building in behind where the old corporate headquarters is, and we were doing some work in that building. And they had some reactors there making cements for rubber to build the tires. You use the cements to hold stuff together on the tire until it was cured. And there was a residue, a liquid that came off of it. They catch it in this 5-gallon bucket. And I asked the foreman there, I said, "What is this stuff?" And he said, "Well, it's idol." Okay. He said it's a solvent. It's stuff that they use to making this. This is a residue that comes off of it, and we pull that off, and it's idol. Well, that was a Goodyear trade name. Come to find out, a couple of years later, idol is benzene.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy's wife, he said, "It won't hurt you. Nothing." He said, "You get it on your hands." He said, "If you got gloves on or something, it'll burn you a little bit. You make your hand." Well, benzene is definitely not good for you. Every tire builder had what they call a Benny can. It was a red can about this big around to about this tall, and they would fill that when they start their job at the start of the day. They'd fill it with benzene, and they would use a brush, and that's what they would wipe on the tire to hold the seams together. And we used it when I was working in the liner division. Sometimes rubber would get stuck in the liners, and you have to take it off. You take a can of Benny, a can had a long spout on it, and you would take and pour that on the liner and then pull the rubber off of it. You're using benzene, and of course, in years later, they find out benzene is definitely not good for you. You don't even want to be around this stuff, And my wife worked with benzene and in the laboratory, and well, she'd tell you some of the chemicals she worked with, and some of the stuff was not good. Not good stuff. And of course, over the years, I think a lot of that, was government, but a lot of it was because of union safety rules, of trying to get in there. How safe are you working? What is this doing to your body? And it wasn't good. We worked with around asbestos a lot. The piping in the plant was all covered with asbestos insulation. And when I first started there, you just go in, if you had to work on that section of pipe, you go in there with a hammer and bust that asbestos off and sweep it over in the corner. Well, you would never dream of doing that today. I mean, that's a huge process, because I got into that process by working in corporate. And there was a huge process just to take off a section of that stuff. You had to get federal approval through the EPA to just remove this stuff. And you had to have people come in that were trained to do it. You had special clothing you had to wear, special tools you work with. It was pretty bad. But when I started with it, it was all over the place. They used to make gasketing material. You put gaskets in between flanges on piping, and that gasket material is made with asbestos. And they used to have it all over the place. I mean, the stuff would float around, and you'd see it up on the beams. It would look like just dust up there, but it's asbestos. It was all over the place.
And now we know that asbestos causes cancer, and I know that some workers tried to file a lawsuit.
Well, they did.
And
all of us were tested for that stuff, They sent us down and had us tested. I was not one that had any issue with it, but there were some of the guys I worked with that had issues with it, and they were receiving. They had a huge settlement with the asbestos companies, and they were getting monthly checks because they were having breathing issues because of asbestosis. It was not good stuff to be around, and we just dealt with it all the time. It was part of the process, and the place is still full of asbestos today. It's all over the place. All the piping is still covered with asbestos, and it's okay as long as it's not friable and flying around. It's okay as long as it's in solid and good condition. You just don't mess with it. Just leave it alone. But it's still there. I could walk you through corporate headquarters and walk you right through it, and that's asbestos right there. And it's all over the place. But it's fine.
So you haven't really suffered any adverse health conditions looking back at all the stuff you used to work with? And
No, I have not. But I know a lot of people that have. I talked, one of the guys that wear his obituaries in today's paper, he had cancer. A lot of it worked in the chemical division. I didn't like working in the chemical division, but part of my training through the apprentice school, I had to work there. But when I had a chance to get out, I was out of there. I didn't want to be there because those chemicals are not good for you. So, it's some of the stuff they don't tell you what it is, or you'll see a sign later on. They had signs up. This is a carcinogen. Okay, and I'm in here working. So, but I've been very lucky. I haven't had any issues as of yet. But I know people that have, a number of people.
What's that time like?
I don't know what the time says. I can't read it. It's too small.
All right. So we've gone for a little over an hour. So,
okay.
Technically, we have as much material as we need, but we can keep going, or we can wrap it up. And if we were, is there anything else that you would want us to know, or that you would want people who will listen to this and use the transcripts for research or anything like that? Is there anything that you would want them to know?
Well, the only thing I can say is, Goodyear was a good place to work. I liked my job there, and it fed my family, put a roof over my head, sent my kids to college, things like that, And I think we even talked about that in the class. Some of the guys talked about it. It was a good place to work. I don't know how it is now. I haven't worked, in the production side of anything there in a long time, so I really don't know how it is working there. It was hard work, but that's okay. Hard work don't hurt you. But I enjoyed the people. That was the best part of my time there. That was the hardest part for me to retire, is the people that I worked around, because I liked the people, especially in the office area. I always felt, when I was doing the air conditioning maintenance, if somebody called, they had a problem, and they were hot, cold, or whatever it was, and I always felt that was my job, to take care of them. And still see a lot of these people today. There's still a lot of them around that I see and talk with and run into at different places, and you get to know them, and it was just a good place to work. And thought it was just a fine way to raise a family, is doing it that way. So you didn't make a lot of, you didn't get rich on it, but I never expected to get rich in my life. Just be able to take care of the family. That's all I ever cared about. So I know we are meeting again. I got an email yesterday, classroom time, I think the 28th or 29th, something like that, of April. So
I think that's our last day of class.
Is that what it is? Yeah, that's the day we're supposed to come in, and anything else that you guys have for us, is fine. We'll answer anything you got. So anything else you need from me?
I just have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you see? Do you ever see think ahead to in Akron?
Okay.
Do you see any industry like that coming back to Akron? Do you see Akron becoming another factory town again, ever?
I don't know that I'll ever see a factory town here. I think it's going to be more of the innovation side. You're going to see more of the upscale type jobs like you see at Goodyear.
Research and IT, I think.
Yeah, you're not going. I don't see another tire building job coming to Akron. I don't see a tire plant ever being built here. I know General will never build one, would they, dear? I just don't see that happening. I know they are up. Just read in the paper they're going to build a plant on Waterloo Road that does recycling of plastics. So, and that's just right up the street here, close to where. No, they're going to build right up here by the catty corner from where the Carousel Theater is.
Oh, up that way. Okay.
Yeah, around that corner, there's an empty area there, and it was in the paper just a couple of weeks ago. So that's a facility that will bring some jobs in. But I think you'll see more of those type of jobs than you would factory work. I just don't see factory work coming back here.
I don't see a car industry being put down here.
What's that?
It won't be like a no car shop or anything.
Yeah. So I don't know. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it happening.
Okay, well, that's great.
Well, guys,
Thank you so much.
it's been